Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Scott Caulfield of CrimsonCast is with us. Last offseason, I believe we did a home and home, and I think the plan is to do that again with CrimsonCast and Podcast on the Brink. Welcome back to the show, Scott. How you doing on this Monday morning?
I'm doing fantastic. It's football season. Alex, what are we doing? Let's talk football, man. 4-0. Hoosiers ready to rock and roll. Maryland. If you're listening to this right now, because you have probably a better reach than we do, please go to the game against Maryland. Like, everyone needs to be there. We need to have that place full. Like, the team has done enough at this point for fans to show up. Like, I get so tired of the fans need to show up thing, but like, if you're listening to this podcast, like, not only go bring a friend, like bring a friend to the Maryland game. Let's go 5-0.
I wanted to ask you a little bit before we start talking hoops about this football start. How surprised have you been at just how, I don't think it's shocking that Indiana's 4-0, but the way that they've completely dismantled four straight opponents, it feels different than other strong starts in IU football history. Am I wrong?
No, you are right. It does feel different. It's something we talk about in our podcast a lot. We do weekly updates after games, that just Cignetti really is the leader of this team, which is kind of like, I get it, he's the head coach, but it all kind of continues to come back to Cignetti, because it's not like you have one singular talent on this team. There's a lot of great players, and Curtis Rourke has been awesome at quarterback, but you don't look at like, oh my God, like that's Antoine Randall or that's, Tevin Coleman. Like, there isn't just an absolute stud back there. It really is a team effort. And you're seeing, there's like 5 or 6 or 7 wide receivers every game getting catches, and running backs. Jordan Ellison goes out and then another one comes back in. It's a program. It's a full program. And the thing we continue to come back to is, the last time you really had a head coach come in with this kind of program building, you have to go back to Mallory. I mean, it happened a little bit with Hepner, but so many other coaches that we've hired have been assistants getting to the head coaching job for the first time, whether it's Tom Allen or Kevin Wilson or Cam Cameron. And it's a real learning process. And what you see with Cignetti is somebody who came in with a plan, with a staff, and with a little bit of confidence. And to me, that's what's been so exciting, is kind of the idea of there's confidence, and like, we need to raise our expectations of IU football, but not just, it's not going to happen maybe this year, but the idea like, oh, can we just get to 6 wins in a bowl? I was listening to something about Cignetti talking. We all remember at the IU game, the IU basketball game last year, where he's like, Purdue sucks, Michigan sucks, Ohio State sucks. He said in, I think, Media Day this year, those comments came from that day he was walking around IU, and everybody was kind of like, man, I hope we just win 6 games. I hope he can just beat Purdue. And he was kind of like, well, yeah, that's really thinking low. Like, I need to get people to think higher. And so that's been really, really fun to watch. The other thing that you're hearing is, all the players who were here last year still have love for Tom Allen, but they're just saying, we really feel like we're given more direction now. We're coached better. We really have a plan. So no, it's been awesome. And the last thing I'll say with football is, it's also based on, this is a relatively soft schedule. When you look at the schedule, look at our schedule versus UCLA's schedule, they're probably wishing they had our Big Ten schedule. But, you look at our schedule, we have pretty open runway. We only have 3 more road games. It's September 23rd. We're like, 5 more games at home. All of the games right now, I think we're favored in, except for the Ohio State game, which no one's favored at Ohio State. And I think the Michigan game would still be a toss-up at this point based on what they did with USC. So, we have a really favorable schedule, which helps also. And as somebody who lived in the Big Ten East in football for like 20 years, I'm apologizing to no one. So, it's all the stars have aligned, and it seems like we might be able to cash in on some of this.
Absolutely. I want to get into hoops, obviously. One reason I love to talk to you is because, you've been in the podcast game with CrimsonCast for a long time. You're also, a season ticket holder at IU. I think, the way you talk about the program, you look at the program different than I do as someone who's taking a press pass and going to these games. Just big picture after last season, where were you with the program, and what did this offseason do, if anything, to change kind of your view on the future and where this thing's headed?
It's a good question. Last season was tough. It was a tough ending. There was a lot of talent. And for me, I'll just speak for myself personally, there wasn't much that happened this offseason that really changed my feeling. And so I've been saying this on CrimsonCast last year and this year, that, when you look at our offseason last year, so 12 months ago, I was saying that was pretty much an A-plus offseason. You bring in Khalil Ware in the transfer portal, and he turned into exactly what we all thought would be the best version of Khalil Ware. You get a 5-star recruit, reclassifying McKenzie Mbako. You get another transfer, Anthony Walker, from a Final Four team, not a starter from that team, but a cog in a very good team. To me, it's like, all right, you got one of the top portal guys, you got a 5-star recruit, and you got another high-level portal guy. To me, it's a pretty good off. Plus, you're bringing back a lot of other pieces. To me, when I looked at last year, I was like, all right, that's a lot of talent. That's enough talent there to at least make the tournament and make some noise in the Big Ten. So when that didn't happen, I don't want to feel jaded. It's like, all right, this offseason, we did the same thing. We got probably the best big man in the portal in Ballo. I know we also got, Miles Rice in the portal. We got a, 5-star and Bryson Tucker coming in. I look at it, I'm kind of like, all right, outside of maybe it's one more piece and maybe a little higher ranking, tell me how much different this was than last year. You're bringing back some of those things. So that's where I was a little bit jaded this offseason, because I'm like, I'm not sure to be fair, I'm not sure what Woodson and the staff could have done to make me feel good, because I give them credit. To me, they A-plus last offseason, and they disappointed with that talent. So this is where I'm kind of, sounds great. I'm excited. I think they did a great job in getting all these players. To me, it's like the proof is going to be when the rubber hits the road in the season. And that's when I'm going to get excited. I'm kind of done with off-season excitement, at least for right now.
One of the things we hear every year, and it's a discussion year in, year out, it's been really since the Tom Crean era, is the 3-point shooting, how it, has been absent. And I think so far this preseason, we've heard more talk about that than maybe the last couple of off seasons. With Media Day happening last week, there was a lot of talk about this new style of play, and even some recruits that Indiana's going after for the future recruiting classes have talked about the Hoosiers having a different type of style this season. As someone that's kind of watched Archie Miller basketball and now Mike Woodson's teams the last 3 years, and let's be fair to Mike Woodson here. The first 2 seasons that he had at Bloomington, he got Indiana basketball back to the tournament, which is some place it had not been since 2016. I was one of I don't want to say the only person to say this, but I constantly kind of beat the drum of Woodson's bringing stability back to the program. To make the tournament the first 2 years was a significant accomplishment based on where things have been. But I also didn't think he was above criticism last year for not getting to the tournament for a third straight year based on the talent that was on that team. And there were some issues last year with Xavier Johnson's injury, and I don't necessarily think the roster construction was all that great when you kind of look at it in hindsight. Maybe in the preseason, a lot of us were fooled by just kind of looking at the talent on the roster and maybe not how the pieces fit together. But I think there's still some skepticism on this quote unquote new style of play because we've yet to see it. Are you kind of in the wait and see camp in terms of Indiana looking any different in terms of how they want to play this season?
I am. I knew this question would come up because this is kind of the question that surrounds IU basketball with Woodson. And to me, the comp, this is going to sound weird, but I was listening to an NBA, I'm also an NBA fan, listening to an NBA podcast talking about Russell Westbrook, who, if you don't know, played for the Oklahoma City Thunder for years. His last couple of years, he's bounced around. He went to Houston. They're like, all right, he's going to lead the team, and it kind of fizzled out there in 1 year. Then Washington's like, all right, we can get him. Lasted 1 year there. Then the Lakers were like, all right, under LeBron, Westbrook's going to become a really good complementary piece. It didn't work. Went to the Clippers for 2 years, didn't really work. And now he's on the Nuggets. It's like, all right, with Jokic, it's going to work. And every time it's like, it's not going to work because Westbrook is who he is, which what made him great at the time. And now it's tough to get him in a complementary role. But every team is like, you're going to go through 5 or 6 of these teams like, no, we can figure it out. And it's like, oh, we can't. We got to get rid of him at the end of the year. It feels like we're doing the same thing with Woodson year in, year out, where year one, it's like, okay, he had to play that way because he had Trace Jackson Davis. So that's the way it's going to be. But like next year, year two, it's going to change because now he has Jalen Hood-Schifino coming in. And it's like, no, didn't really change. Although oddly, his second year, we were 39th in the country in 3-point percentage. We shot 36% from three. Problem was we were dead last in 3-point attempts. We were 354th in the country. So we actually shot better from three. We just did it less. So answer that. And then it's like, all right, then everybody's last off season is like, all right, without Trace Jackson Davis, now the change is going to come. We're going to see the real Woodson offense. Didn't see it again. And now I'm hearing that again. It's like, it feels again, it's like, all right, this is the third, fourth team that's going to take Westbrook. To me, it's like Russell Westbrook is who he is. And I think Woodson coaches the way he coaches. A guy in his mid 60s who's probably on his, doesn't have like 5 more coaching jobs ahead of him. I just don't see him making revolutionary changes with his coaching style. And I think that the history bears it out, that the way that he wants to coach basketball is the way that we've seen this team play the last couple of years. And everyone's harping on the 3-point shooting because we are one of the dead last teams in 3-point attempts. I just don't think that's going to change. I think for this team to be successful, they have to find another area to be unbelievably elite. Like I was looking at some of the Final Four teams from last year, and not all of them are shooting the threes at a super high clip. But you look at Purdue, it's like their offense was adjusted efficiency 4th in the country and 12th defensively. Like they were just unbelievably efficient on offense. Connecticut is the same thing. They are the number 1 efficient offense in the country. Even NC State, which kind of got a cute little run, up to the Final Four, they had one of the best. They just didn't turn the ball over, and they stole the ball a lot. They were just unbelievable. If you're going to have a run, you've got to A, get in the tournament, but B, you need to find something that you are just unbelievably efficient at. And that's where I look at this team. It's like, all right, if we're not going to shoot threes, you have to be just a really good 2-point shooting team and really good shooting free throws. And we're not good at those either. But to answer the question, I think it's kind of silly to look at it and say, okay, now we're going to change the way he approaches basketball because he hasn't shown it. So I think all these pieces is like, we're probably going to see Ballo and Malik Renew playing together. We're going to see a lot of post touches. We're probably going to see not a lot of 3-point shooting. And then finally, the thing that with the 3-point shooting that's kind of surprising to me is it's not even just the lack of attempts. It's that it's like the wrong guys are taking the shots. Last year, our best 3-point shooter was, Anthony Leal only took 19 of them, but he was good. Khalil Ware out of volume was our best 3-point shooter. He only took 43s. You had Mackenzie Mbaku taking 153. Now he got way better as the season went on, but was still a 32% 3-point shooter. It's like where they're going isn't right. There's not enough of them going in. But I think for those who think, oh, this is the year it's going to change because we have different players, like I've heard that for 3+ years, and I'm very wary of that changing.
So do you think that Indiana can still be successful and make a deep tournament run without the 3-point shot, or do you think the volume has to increase to maybe, I don't want to even say an average level, but above where it has been? Do you think that's like a necessary thing to happen, or do you think they can find other ways to win consistently?
I think they can find other ways to win. I mean, I think, it would be nice to hit more threes. I think what you end up seeing, this isn't really a statistical thing, but you just see in the game is that, when we're playing teams that hit threes, it's like you could play really well, but you're kind of up by 4, 6, or 7. And it's like one bad possession, they hit a 3, you turn it over, they hit a 3. It's like it's a 1-point game. And it's just, you have a really hard time stretching the lead, and other teams have a really easy time bringing it back. But, you look at Woodson's first year, that was a team that did okay, and they were, 24th in the country defensively on a adjusted defensive rating. To me, that's the other thing that has slipped is you look at his first 3 years, we've gone from 24th in the country to 45th in the country to 84th in the country. So our adjusted defense year in, year out has gotten worse. The defense has gotten worse every year under Woodson. And so, and that's the thing that is concerning me is a lot of these indicators are kind of going the wrong way. To answer your question, you can win without shooting a bunch of threes. You just have to do something else at an elite level. And so whether it be defense, whether it be, 2-point percentage being just unbelievably efficient, whether it being free throws, and that's the other thing. We shot a lot of free throws. We were one of the worst free throw shooting teams in the country. That to me is what's going to have to change is this team is going to have some kind of identity where it's like, that is our thing and this is what we do. And right now, I'm not sure what it is. It's like we pound the ball to the post, but we don't really do it efficiently. And we get to the line and we're not great there. I mean, that would be my question to you is like, out of the Woodson era, like what to you is the hallmark of what this team does and is built around?
I think offensively, it's just getting to the free throw line. If you look
Yeah.
consistently at the free throw rate, which, we like to look at Ken Palm. A lot of people think maybe we're too obsessed with the four factors on Ken Palm, but their effective field goal percentage, which basically measures your shooting with a little extra weight towards 3-point shooting, turnover percentage, which obviously is how well you take care of the ball, offensive rebounding percentage, which is something I want to talk to you a little bit about. The rebounding in general was very bad last year. And then the free throw rate, which is basically the free throw attempts divided by the field goal attempts, measuring how well you get to the free throw line, which I think you can build a really good offense around that, but you're kind of hurting yourself when you are getting to the line a ton and then you can't make the free throws. It's like, okay, that's a great strategy, but then if you're going to shoot 66% from the free throw line, you're not really using your biggest strength offensively. So that, to me, that's been the biggest strength of his offenses, is getting to the line, which, they like to get the ball inside, and they've had some guys that can score efficiently in the paint. But I think getting the free throw percentage up just 4 or 5% would pay huge dividends. The one thing that kind of made my ears perk up a little bit at media day last week was hearing guys talk about the rebounding and how they know it needs to get better. Because when I look at last season, the offensive rebounding percentage, 254th in the country, defensive rebounding percentage, 211th in the country. And then on Ken Palm, I like to go down and look at a little thing, average height. Indiana was the 4th tallest team in the country last year. So it's hard for me to square the fact that they had that size. They had Khalil Ware, they had Malik Renew, they had Mackenzie Mbako, and they were that poor on the boards. And to me, if you're going to emphasize getting the ball inside relentlessly, you should be a much better offensive rebounding team than 254th in the country. So to me, that's an optimization that they can make this year with Ballo. He's a great offensive rebounder, much better. Khalil Ware is a good offensive rebounder. Umar Ballo was one of the best offensive rebounders in the country last season. So to me, I think if you're not going to shoot a bunch of threes, you need to be much better on the offensive and defensive boards. And also, I think they could do a little bit better causing turnovers. I mean, they were 308th last year, turning teams over. I'm not saying you have to press up and down the court or take a bunch of chances in the passing lanes, but you've got Miles Rice now, you've got Kanan Carlisle, you've got some other pieces that can probably play pretty well in transition. So why not maybe try to cause a little bit more friction defensively and get yourself some easy opportunities in transition? Those are the kind of things that I look at and say, if you're not going to shoot 3-pointers at a very high volume, those are things that you can improve on, and then all of a sudden offensive numbers start to become better as a team.
Yeah, I mean, I'll continue on that same thought. Not only were we one of the tallest teams, we played them all the same time. It's not like we had a rotation of you had Khalil Ware playing with Malik Renew, playing with Mackenzie Mbako. You played them all together, so it's like you had lineups where you had way more height than the teams you were playing. Both the offensive and defensive rebounding, as I look at it here, it's gone down each year. The trend is going. We're becoming a worse defensive rebounding team. We're becoming a worse offensive rebounding team. And this is where, I get concerned with the idea of like, oh, we just got to bring in more talent. We just need more talent. We just need more talent. It's like, and they did, to their credit, they did it. Like they got more transfer talent. They got more recruiting talent. I would just say that, it's when IU has had success in basketball, unfortunately, we're getting to the points like we don't have as much as we used to. But in the times that we've had it, it was, you think back to those first couple years with Crean, he built a really solid team with, I'm not saying they're not good, but Watford and Hulls, they were complementary, very high level complementary pieces, but they did different things. They did things well. And you kind of built a nice foundation with Sheehy and, you had Yogi Ferrell. And it's like, then you bring in some of the high level talent and Cody Zeller, and then somebody blossoms like Oladipo. That's how a team like Indiana does it. The idea that we're just going to out talent everybody is tough, because that's what Kentucky and North Carolina and Duke have been doing for 25, 30 years. And the idea that we're just going to jump into that and get all of the talent to have enough to just out talent teams, I think is is kind of a fool's errand. Um, but you're right. Like these are the things that need to happen. When you look back to last year, I think the thing that people aren't fully kind of wrapping their mind around is last year. And again, we also get too deep into probably the Ken Palm numbers, but it's a good kind of barometer of where we are. Just gives you a snapshot. Last year, when you look at the adjusted offense and the adjusted defense, we ranked 105th in adjusted offense in the country, 84th in adjusted defense. Those are worse numbers than any of Archie Miller's teams. Like, just let that sink in. And I think that's where the numbers are instructive. And when people look back just kind of in their mind anecdotally the Archie years, it's like, well, they sucked on defense and they had no talent. It's like, well, I think we had more talent last year than we had under the Archie years. That's not maybe totally fair, but and I think that's when you look at things like that's what needs to be looked at here is how underwhelming last season was. Cause I think there was enough talent there to be better than any of those Archie teams. And we kind of, the conventional wisdom is Archie just couldn't coach and his system didn't work. It's like, all right, well, that's the case. How come all of his teams were better than last year's team from a statistical point of view?
So you're a season ticket holder, and
yeah,
I'm sure you've seen the non-conference home schedule. What did you think? Just and I can, if you don't have it in front of you, I can read it here for you real quick. They've got SIU, SIU, Edwardsville, Eastern Illinois, South Carolina, UNC Greensboro, Sam Houston State, Miami of Ohio, Chattanooga, and Winthrop. Now, the last couple of years, it was almost like Indiana was too ambitious with some of their non-conference games, playing Kansas, playing Arizona, playing Auburn, getting absolutely destroyed in that game. They played Louisville and UConn last year in New York, split those games, but the UConn game wasn't competitive. So the meat of kind of what's going to be interesting in the non-conference is the South Carolina game, I guess, could be mildly interesting at home at that third home game, November 16th at Assembly Hall. And then Atlantis is what people are looking forward to. How does it square with you as a season ticket holder to have this non-conference home schedule? Did it bother you at all, or do you look at it as, hey, this is a chance for this team to kind of get acclimated to each other early in the season and get some momentum going before Big Ten play?
I mean, I can't lie. I would love as a season ticket holder to have one more marquee game at Assembly Hall. But to be fair, over the last 5 or 10 years, it's kind of been this way where you have a lot of kind of bought wins, and then you normally have one. My Galen, who I do a podcast with, like we always joke, we try and go to like what's the premier non-conference game. It would normally, because some years, like one year like SMU, so it's there have been a lot of years where we haven't had a really premium opponent come into Assembly Hall. Last year was a little different with Kansas, so it's kind of something that I've been used to at this point. I understand the economics of it too. You're not, with the Big Ten basketball schedule looming, you're not going to load up with a bunch of those games. And it's also, I understand that a lot of the high level teams don't want to do home and home, so they'd rather do neutral site games. So there's a lot of those factors. So I'm not as annoyed about it. The thing that I think people need to be prepared for is last season, the trouble that we had. And this was kind of the talk going into last season. Like I always get frustrated with moving the goalpost over and over and over again, because last season the talk was, all right, we were starting to schedule these good teams under Woodson, which I like. We're bringing back Kentucky, and last year was like you had Connecticut, you had Louisville, you had Auburn, you had Kansas. It was like, and I think the year before we also had Kansas and Arizona. Like yeah, and it's like 2 years ago it was like, all right, great, we got them on the schedule, that's fine. This last year was like, all right, we got them on. Like now we got to start cashing some of these in. Well, you didn't cash any of them in. It's like, okay, but like now this year can't just be, well, now we're going to stop scheduling. Like this is the year we're supposed to not only schedule them, but also cash them in. Last year, part of the reason we didn't make the NCAA tournament was because we just didn't have a non-conference schedule that helped us at all. And our metrics were awful. All of those losses by huge margins just did not help at all. When you look at the schedule this year, I'm nervous because it all comes down to Atlantis. Like it is literally all coming down to Atlantis. There are no other really not even signature games, just games that would help your profile come March. Because everyone's like, oh, they'll do it in the Big Ten. It's like, well, but everyone does everything in the conference, and it's going to be kind of washed away. Like you have to have some metrics in the non-conference to help you bolster that that resume, because we're not going to go, 15-1 in the conference. You're going to have some losses. It's going to be up and down. And that's my concern is, that first game to me in Atlantis is unbelievably important, because if you lose that game, not only are you losing to Louisville, which isn't awesome, but you lose that game, you're in the losers bracket, and now you may not play anybody who's good. Like, I forget who else is, like, I think UConn. Who else is in the Atlantis? Like UConn.
No, UConn's not in there. West Virginia, Oklahoma, Davidson are some of the lesser teams. And obviously, Arizona's like, there and Gonzaga.
Arizona, that's what. Yeah, it's like if you lose, you could be playing Davidson and like West Virginia. You could just basically have no signature non-conference games at all. And I think that's the biggest fear when you put all of that into this bucket. So for me, I look at this like I would have loved to have had one or two more kind of, 100 to 50 ranged KenPom teams in there. You don't need to bring Kansas and Duke in, just a couple more wins that'll look really good on your resume. And that's, 2 years ago, that was that, Xavier win at Xavier. That thing helps so much, having a non-conference game like that, because like I said, once you get to the conference, unless you're just utterly decimating your conference, it's kind of going to be just it is what it is. And then it's going to go back to the non-conference.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say about just the non-conference in general that I think needs to be really examined from a philosophy standpoint with Indiana, because last year I remember some of those early games where they barely squeaked by, and it was like after the press conference, Woodson was like, well, we won, and that's all that matters. And I'm thinking to myself, well, did you notice that even after winning the game, you just dropped 10 to 15 spots in KenPom because you played a lesser opponent and you didn't blow them out? What they have a chance to do with this schedule that I think can be a positive is you can't have the NBA mentality of just we won the game. You have to go out and absolutely throttle these teams, win by 30 or 40, and all of a sudden nobody's talking about barely squeaking by, or your computer numbers are going down. I think some other conferences have kind of learned this. You can manipulate the net by scheduling maybe a little bit lighter and just absolutely winning by 30 or 40. So Indiana has to make that an emphasis on what they do this season. It can't be, well, it's a new team, we're still learning each other, we'll be better by January. No, the first game when you come out against SIU Edwardsville, beat them by 40. Don't beat them by 6 or 7. Beat them by 40, and your numbers are going to look better.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that.
So the other thing I just wanted to talk to you about in general about this team, who are you most intrigued to see? I know you haven't done a ton of you told me before, Scott's kind of in football mode still, and we'll forgive him for that. But football's going great, right? 4-0. There's a lot to be excited about. You may be in football mode until late December. Who knows? There could be, a really good bowl game that IU football goes to. But some of the names. Miles Rice is coming in at point guard. Kanan Carlisle comes in from Stanford, was a high-level recruit. Luke Goody comes over from Illinois, can provide some shooting from the wing. Umar Ballo, Indiana fans surely remember him from a couple of years ago from that game in Las Vegas where he was a complete load to handle in the paint. You got Bryson Tucker as a 5-star wing coming in, who was, I don't want to say the replacement for Liam McNeely after he decommitted, but who are you most intrigued of these newcomers? It doesn't have to be one, but I'm just curious who you're most excited to see and learn more about when the season tips off.
It would be Ballo, just because I was at that game in Arizona in Vegas, and he was an absolute load. And it was like, wow, this guy's good. And, we've been a little critical here. Let's be very positive of Woodson. Woodson has shown an ability to take big men and get the absolute maximum of what they can offer on the court. He took Trace Jackson Davis and expanded his game, turned him into almost a point guard. He really took Trace Jackson. Trace Jackson was good, and then took him to another level. And then that last year took him to another level. He gets Khalil Ware, who, there was motor questions about him at Oregon. It was kind of like, can this guy put it together? Dude, he put it together immediately. I would have liked to see him shoot more threes, but to me, there's nothing you can say bad about Khalil Ware's season last year. He provided everything you wanted more. So, he's shown an ability to kind of make big men better in a variety of ways, whether it's guys who we question their motor, whether not us, but that was one of the questions with Ware, whether it's guys with, Trace Jackson Davis, like, can this guy add more to his game? It's like, yeah, he added a ton more to his game. So to me, I think the highest upside stock would be Ballo, because he comes in, he has the pedigree, he's a good frame. And you have Woodson, who has an ability to do this with big men. So I would say that. I would also say Miles Rice, just because he, I know I spent 20 minutes talking about this before. It looks like he can shoot the three. And so it's like, it is that, like, you still kind of get roped back into this. Like, well, maybe this is the year, if we have the guy who can really shoot threes, we will start to shoot threes. Because I will say, 2 years ago, you had Miller Kopp shooting, like, I got to pull the number up. It's like 42% from three or something. Yeah, Miller Kopp shot 44% from three with 142 attempts. So he took a good amount of threes. So again, Woodson has shown that if he has somebody who can hit threes, he can run a system to get guys shots and would get them a little more at volume. So I'm curious about that. And then I know it's a bit of an unfair answer, and maybe it leads us into our next thing, but I would say he's not a newcomer, but I'm also really intrigued to see what we get out of Mackenzie Mbako this year. Just because last year you could see that was a kid who was struggling with the high school to college transition, which is really, really hard. But as the year went along, he really blossomed in my mind, and he got a lot of confidence, and you saw little spurts where it's like he felt like he was the best player on the floor. And I don't have the numbers here, but his 3-point shooting percentage really is skewed, because the first like 8 or 10 games, he was shooting like 12%. Like he had a couple like 0 for 6, 0 for 8 games. And I know it doesn't work this way, but if you take like the first 2 months of the season out from his 3-point shooting percentage, I think he shot like 38 or 39% for the rest of the year. You really saw him blossom. And to me, it's like he has the hallmarks of a guy where it's like, if we're going to see a leap of somebody year 1 to year 2, I feel like he could be somebody that really jumps off the page, because he has all the athletic, pedigree there. It feels like just kind of understanding where he fits in on the court, feeling comfortable, feeling confident. Feels like that's the piece that was starting to grow at the end of last year.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. A couple of things popped in my mind as you were talking. Mackenzie Mbako, I like to reference the 3-point shooting number that he had in the Big Ten, which I believe was 38%.
There you
which
go.
Kind of shows the fact that he did struggle early and got better as the season went along. And I mean, 38% in the Big Ten as a freshman on the volume that he took, that's a pretty good number. I mean, if he can shoot 40 or 42 this year, I mean, that's really good. I think that's a positive thing. The other thing I'll say, and this is just kind of a side note, you mentioned Miles Rice. I was at Media Day last week. We had an opportunity to talk to pretty much every player that's on the scholarship player on the roster for this year. They did it a little bit differently this year, where they had in the players in Cook Hall. So they had like 5 or 6 players out on the court for like a 40-minute rotation, then brought 5 or 6 other players out after that. And Miles Rice was in the second group. So as I noticed that the next group was coming in, I wanted to go over and talk to him first, because to me, he's one of the obviously most important players on the team. And, he very personable guy, like shook my hand right there and introduced himself, talked to him for 10 or 15 minutes, and just an engaging, personable guy. And I think from like a leadership standpoint and what you need out of a point guard, just from that short conversation, I'm like, this guy is going to be, I don't want to say a complete game changer, but just the way he was able to command a conversation. If that's the way he communicates on the court and with his teammates, I think that has a chance to be really impactful. So that was just something, kind of a side note that I noticed from talking to him. And they all, I think, have their strengths in different ways, but I think communication as a point guard is very important. So I was definitely encouraged with Miles Rice from that standpoint.
No,
the last thing,
that's something, and he's somebody who can be here for, in the transfer portal era, who knows, maybe he goes at the end of the year, but that's somebody, he's a sophomore, correct? Like coming as a sophomore. Yeah. So he could be somebody that we could get to know for a couple of years. And that was, I personally really liked everything that Xavier Johnson brought to the team. I thought he brought kind of a dog mentality, like really attacked, and he, I think, helped bring a lot out of Trace Jackson Davis. And he really, I think some of the teams that he was on, they needed that, but it did feel like, when the team was kind of his and he gave him the car keys, and he also got really bad injury luck. But all the things you're saying, it felt like Xavier kind of needed a little more guardrails. And once he kind of got off, and like maybe not have been the best leader for last year's team, just because his mentality is so aggressive, so up and down. And you saw it with some of his antics, with flagrant fouls and stuff, where it's like you really need to rein him in. And so that's a good thing to hear. Again, no knock on X. I think what X brought was needed. It's just he needed a little. It was tough for him, I think, to lead the team, because he kind of needed his own guardrails too, to keep himself kind of focusing that energy in the right way. So it's good to hear that about Rice.
And Rice will be a story that I think a lot of people are going to, are a player that a lot of people are going to root for just because of his story off the court, obviously with redshirting his first season at Washington State and then battling cancer and being able to come back and play from that. I mean, adversity within a game is going to be nothing to Miles Rice when, you know, he fought and beat cancer at such a young age. I mean, he's just happy that he can be healthy and be able to play. He looks at this as a great opportunity. So I think a lot of people are going to be really excited with him. I had him in my, I'm not sure if you, Scott, if you followed our list of top 40 Big Ten players in the preseason that we released with Hoops. We had him in the top 5. I think a lot of people were surprised that we had him as the highest ranked IU player, but he was a first team all Pac-12 guy last season. He was the Pac-12 freshman of the year. Indiana brought him in for a reason. I think he's going to have the ball in his hands a ton. And if they're going to be a successful team, I think it's going to be Miles Rice leading the charge. And that kind of leads me into my final question for you. Successful team. How are we to define that for this Indiana basketball season? Is it competing for a Big Ten championship? I'm one of those people that a lot of people want to say, like, well, if Woodson doesn't get to the second weekend this year, it's a complete failure. I've always been more in the camp of the regular season is really how you. I know that you have to judge things on March, but if you have a great regular season and you come up against a like what Indiana happened to Indiana a couple of years ago with the Miami game, I think it was a bad matchup for them. It doesn't take away from the fact that they had a really good season, but they lost to a Miami team that I thought was quite frankly better than they were, and went on to prove that by reaching the Final Four. But I know it's a tough question to answer, but you're the perfect guy to give us the answer. How do we define success now in college basketball in a season? Is it a certain number of wins? Is it competing for a Big Ten title? Do you look more at NCAA tournament success? Because I think a lot of people want to know, like, what's going to be good enough for Indiana this year. And obviously Mike Woodson has to be better than he was last year. I'm just curious, in your eyes, what you think has to be accomplished this year.
Yeah, it's a great question. I have a bit of a different view than some other people in that, you know, it's unfair to look at things year in, year out and say, okay, this year you have to get to the Final Four, because the NCAA is a crapshoot. Like, it just is. And you could have 2 seed and hit the wrong team at the wrong time. And like, that sucks. 2 seeds have lost, 1 seeds have lost. You know, I look at it, but I also look at things from a macro view that, you know, you also can't go 10 years and not make the Sweet 16. Or, you know, if you're in an Indiana program where we want to be where we want to be, I think this is where we kind of move the goalposts and let things slide. It's like, if we really want to be a blue blood, which I want to be, and I feel like we treat ourselves as such, and we definitely talk about season ticket holder, we definitely charge as such. You know, you got to make the Final Four once every 8 or 10 years. You just do. And so, you know, the problem is, if you haven't done it for 9 years, this becomes the year you have to do it, because now you're 10. You know, you're 25 or something. So it's like, at some year, it's got to be the year. We're in that tough spot. You know, I'll keep talking down to an answer, I promise.
Sure.
You know, when I look at coaches in college basketball, especially at programs that have resources that are focused on a successful basketball program, which Indiana is and does provide the resources, you know, normally by year 4, the coach is where that program is going to be. So just a couple examples. I bring guys up all the time. Like, you look at Nate Oates, gets to Alabama. He's 16-15. He's 26-7. He's 19-14. By year 4, he's 31-6. They're in the Sweet 16. Like, I think they won the SEC. Like, they are off to where they're going to be. And that's what they're 16-2 in the SEC. They're off. Like, that's now Nate Oates has Alabama humming. You know, everyone's darling right now is Dan Hurley. His 4th year at Connecticut, you know, they're 23-10, 13-6 in the Big East. Maybe not what everybody wanted, but they are in round 1. But you can, like, they think they lost in round 1, but you kind of see things building. They were a 5 seed. Like, they had a shot at getting to where they want. They were upset. Like, that sucks. They're kind of on their way. You know, so I look at it as, this is a pivotal year for Woodson, because to me, you know, the other thing too that you don't have with a guy like Nate Oates or Dan Hurley or some of the younger coaches is, like, Woodson's got to get it done soon because there is an age thing here too. We don't have a 25-year runway with Woodson. Like, he can't just like, at some point he's going to get what he's going to get, and he's probably got 5 or 6 more years left, not just based on age, not even just a firing thing. So I look at, this is a pivotal year because to me, year 4 is kind of, this is where we are as a program. And so if the best we can get is this, the second game in March, that's not ideal. Unfortunately, some built up expectations have been given to this team because, 2 years ago, they were a 4 seed. They were a protected seed. That's a great season. You got to a seed line that should get you the Sweet 16. As you said, you hit a Miami team that was hot. No foul in that. The problem is we're not getting enough shots at the apple at that 4-3-2 seed line. So last year, you didn't make the tournament at all. And that's where you look at like NC State. NC State made the tournament, and then like boom, everything happened right, and they got there. I'm not saying IU would have been there, but it's like Khalil Warrow's a handful. And maybe you have the wrong, NC State had that big dude that no one could guard for like 4 games, and then suddenly he was guardable, but they were in the Final Four. Indiana keeps on missing those opportunities. So to me, I think a very successful season with this assemblage of talent and the amount of people we got, you need to be competing for the top of the Big Ten. And you really need to be competing for a protected seed in the tournament, because that's going to give you the opportunity to have a really good shot to make a run in March. But I mean, Alex, I will say this. I want to flip the question on you. I'm curious your answer too. But I will say this, like, this is where you get into this problem of, my larger thought is like, if they don't make the Sweet 16 or Final Four this year, it's like, that's probably not the end of the world because it's a brand new team. But it's like, at some point, it's got to happen. Like, at some point, it's got to be the year. And so just like the expectations keep getting pushed off, and they keep getting larger to the point where this fan base, rightfully so, is like, hey, when is it going to happen? Because we've seen UConn like go up and down and up and down. They keep going back up. So to answer the question, I think they need to be competing at a high level in the Big Ten. And to me, you need to be on that 1 through 4 seed line in the tournament when it comes all said and done.
Yeah, it's difficult to answer with like certain like guidelines that have to be hit, because it's who knows what can happen. Guys can get injured. Things maybe don't work out the way you imagine when the season starts. I'll go back to Tom Crean. He obviously had 3 terrible seasons to start his IU career, completely different circumstances. By year 4, he's in the Sweet 16. Archie Miller got 4 seasons. When he didn't get it done after 4 seasons, didn't make the tournament. Obviously, I think that 3rd year was COVID. He would have made the tournament had it happened, but he the body of work was there that Indiana had to move on from him. Woodson is different in the fact that he made the tournament the first 2 years, so he kind of built up a little bit of goodwill from that standpoint. Last year was such a step backward that I think a lot of people wanted a change at the end of last year, which I thought was a little bit ridiculous. As poor as things went, to just totally discount the first 2 years and say go in a different direction just because one season went poorly, I think that was a bit of an extreme opinion, and it kind of speaks to just fandom in general right now. People want success right away, and if they don't get it, they want to change the coach, and I don't necessarily think that's always the best approach. With all that said, the resources that were put into this program in the offseason, the players that they were able to land, and the expectations, which right now I'm sitting here on September 23rd in Blue Ribbon Yearbook, which has been a staple of college basketball coverage for 30 plus years, to me is the premier preseason publication for college basketball, picked Indiana to win the Big Ten. Am I saying they have to win the Big Ten? No, but if they're not competing for the Big Ten championship, to me, that's a disappointment. And I'll go back to what I said on the tournament, and I think you hit it right on. You said it perfectly. To give yourself a chance to consistently advance in the tournament, you have to get a good seed. You can't be a 7 or 8 seed. You can't be what Indiana was in Woodson's first year, playing in the first 4 and then having to do some ridiculous thing where you fly across the country and give yourself no chance to beat St. Mary's because of the ridiculous travel schedule. Get yourself in an advantageous spot with a solid regular season, and then the tournament, as we all know, is a complete crapshoot. You can't go out and get embarrassed completely, but if you lose a close game and say the second round and you played really well and somebody else just beats you, that's completely different than getting beat by how they did, against St. Mary's or Miami. So what I'm looking for is competing for the Big Ten title, being in, I think, 3, 4, 5 seed range, giving yourself at worst a chance to advance. And then I also think how it looks is important too, right? Like, protect home court. Assembly Hall affords you a great, opportunity to win a ton of home games. Be more competitive on some of these road games. I think we'll learn a lot from that first road game, right? They go to Nebraska in mid-December and play a road game this season. They lost 3 times in Nebraska last season. That should never happen in Indiana basketball. How do you respond? Are you going to be more competitive in road games? Those are kind of all the things. I'm looking at when I'm evaluating a season, because I just don't think you can say if Indiana doesn't finish better than second in the Big Ten, they don't make the Sweet 16. The coaching change should be made. It's not that black and white for me.
No, I agree with that final statement 100%. I also think, at some point they've got to make the Final Four. It's like they just have to. Like we've probably slipped more off of blue blood than we want to assume. But when you look at the team that have the most Final Fours, like it's North Carolina, UCLA, Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, Michigan State, Ohio State, Indiana. All the schools above us have made a Final Four more recently than we have. Some of them multiple times, and it's like they've all had transfers, they've all had injuries, they've all had coaching changes, they've all had, except for Michigan State, they've all had. They have adversity in the micro, but in the macro, they're able to persevere and get things done. And Indiana has all of those things. I'm going to take a pivot here. You talk about the fan reaction. We talked a little bit before we started about the fan reaction the end of last year. I think this is the kind of the tough fire that Indiana athletics has to deal with is, there is this feeling that, the fans are really itching for this. And it's like, well, 2 tournaments isn't good enough for Woodson. We got to do better. It's like, well, I look at it this way, that you have a fan base that is passionate, that is really wants high expectations, and they want high level success. And for the most part, they've shown up, they've paid the money, they travel, they've given that at that high level, really with a program that hasn't given them the results that deserve that amount of respect. And you look on the other side, we started the podcast talking about football. That's a fan base that has kind of just been zoned out for 40 years, 50 years. And now they're getting good. And it's like the university is, come on, like get in on this. It's like, well, if you're IU, like, you can't have it both ways. You can't be pissed at football fans for not showing up, but then be pissed at basketball fans like, oh, you guys want too much. It's like, no, in my mind, you want an IU basketball fan base. You want a fan base that's asking a lot, that's demanding a lot, that's also giving you a lot, giving you a ton of money for these resources, showing up at games. And yeah, that comes with some high level expectations. And yeah, they want a Final Four in a more unrealistic timeline than, let's say, Iowa. And that's why we're not Iowa. I get, this wasn't at you, Alex, but I get, as a season ticket holder and a fan with high expectations, I bristle at that when I hear those comments of like, it's a little bit unrealistic to expect this. It's like, well, what do you want the fan base to be? Because we can be more realistic and just, hey, the round 32 is good enough for me. It's like, that's great. That's what Northwestern's happy with. That's what Nebraska basketball's happy with. Like, do you want that kind of engaged fan base? Because you don't get it both ways. So sorry, a bit of a tangent there, but
no, that's fair.
It's right. When you look at the two fan bases, it's like IU. To me, it always feels like IU athletics wants the super engaged fan base without any of the real expectations that come with it. Because I can guarantee you this, like, for all the talk of like IU fans and dusty banners and like their fans aren't wanted, like, go give Duke a 30-year stretch without a Final Four and like see how antsy their fans are going to be. Or North Carolina, go give them a run where they've only made it to the second weekend 3 times in 20 years. Like, let's check back with them in 2042 and see how they're hanging in. And what their angst level is like. It's like this is really an unprecedentedly bad run for Indiana basketball. So I agree with everything you said. I'm also not saying like there should be a change. You don't need to get crazy. Coaching searches don't need to start happening all the time. But it's like that pressure is good. And that pressure needs to continue to be there, because I personally may sound like I'm complaining. I'm not. I don't want to lower those expectations. I want us to be a top tier brand. I love paying the prices. I love going to Assembly Hall, I just wish that some of the results were more Final Four caliber. And to your point, I think like this is where the talent is there. Like it really is. This is an unbelievable amount of talent. You A+ back to back off seasons. So there's no reason why you can't A+ a season now, in the Big Ten in the tournament.
Yeah, everything's set up there for success. And
yeah,
I think for a long time, Indiana basketball has had top 5, top 10 fan base, top 5, top 10 resources, and they've not had those results. I mean, you look at their rank in KenPom since KenPom started, I think is 1998. It goes back, I think they're somewhere like 20 to 25 in terms of program rank. So they've been a solid program, but they've not been, the results haven't really matched the resources that the program's been given or the fan support that the program's been given. And I think it's fair for people to expect more. And I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and I'll hit the same topic again one last time. Like, it's about, at bats. It's just the number of at bats you get in the tournament. And that has been the problem with IU for the last 25 years is, what is it, like 12 years? They haven't even made the tournament. And so many of the years are unprotected seed. Like you go back to our last Final Four. I'm doing this by memory, so please forgive me. But it's like that was a good team. But that was a 5 seed. That I think the 4 seed in that region was USC, and they lost in the first round. It's like we played like UNC Williamsburg. Something like we got a break there, and then it's like you had to beat somebody. You beat Duke, like that was a tough win. But then like Kent State was the Elite 8 game, who was a 12 or 13 seed at that, and then you play a first year coach in Kelvin Sampson, a younger coach, I guess Mike Davis, like you get another game there. It's like something you're playing for a title. Like that was, things broke right. But what also happened is we were in the tournament at a 5 seed. Like we were in a good spot. And so many years we're in that 7 to 12 range, or we're not even in the tournament. And to me, that's the biggest problem is like, and that's where I look at last year is like last year was a tournament team that we lost another at bat. We're not even getting an at bat. And so many of these teams that have gotten Final Fours over Indiana over the last 20, 25 years, it's not because they're better teams or better programs or better fan bases. Dude, they're just there. Like they're just there to capitalize on a good break or a good draw. And for us to be like, it's not happening to us because we're not there. We're not even in the conversations. To me, that's the number one thing we have to get back to is like, let's just be a protected seed 7 out of 10 years and be in the tournament the other 3. Like that's where we need to be. And I think that's what was disappointing last year is like we even fell back from that, from all the talk. We're back in the tournament. It's like we're now out of the tournament again. So like to me, we got to be back, protected seed. Like to me, that is a fair, reasonable goal. It's like 70% of the time you're a protected seed, and then you kind of let the chips fall as they may, and then it becomes way more of a longer discussion of like, all right, we've done this for 20 years. Now why are we not cashing in at the high level? And that is really that's more luck and just right things and the perfect blend of players. But I think that's our number one problem is just take a step back. It's like, we just got to be in and got to have, swings at the plate.
Well, Scott, thanks for carving out the time. I know we're going to do this again in a couple of weeks and come back on.
We're going to have you back on. We're going to do a bit of a different discussion. We'll make it fun, and we'll have you on CrimsonCast.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks so much as always for joining the show. If you enjoy Podcast on the Brink, and if you're at this point in the episode, over an hour in or just about, I assume that you do enjoy the show. Do us a quick favor, leave us a rating or a review over on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify. It really does help us to maybe reach some more listeners that maybe haven't discovered the show to this point. And, the algorithms on the different platforms maybe like to favor the shows that have more ratings and reviews. So we'd be very thankful if you could do that for us. And we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.